If artificial intelligence is a 24-hour clock, then we're only at 2 o'clock in the morning. We've got 22 hours left to go. At 2 a.m., the party that was promised by sunrise hasn't even started yet. This just happened. Microsoft pulled the plug. Starbucks pulled the plug. Uber pulled the plug. A Starbucks AI couldn't count the milk. Uber torched a year of budget in just 4 months. One company spent $500 million by accident. And then the high priest himself, Sam Altman, looked into a camera and said he was wrong. And so the pronouncement went out to 10 million feeds. Artificial intelligence, AI, time of death, 2 a.m. Here's the problem with calling time of death at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. isn't when things die. It's the hour that nobody's watching. The dark, quiet, unglamorous hour when the thing on the table is just getting started. And right now, while 10 million people are writing the obituary, the patient they buried is processing 3 quadrillion requests a month. That's not a corpse. That's a pulse that most people are just too tired to hear. So before you sign the death certificate, let's do the autopsy they skipped. There's a word for what's actually happening here, and it isn't collapse. It's transition. Keep that clock in your head because it's the only frame that survives contact with the data. Here's the trap that the skeptics fall into. They cherry pick the moments where AI hasn't delivered the savings, the failed pilot, the blown budget, the system that couldn't count milk, and they hold these up as proof that the whole movement is unwinding. But a failed pilot is not a failed technology. A repriced budget is not a retreat, and a CEO updating his timeline is not a CEO surrendering his entire thesis. Every major technology in history went through exactly this. A correction right before the next wave. And if you're finding this perspective valuable, do me a favor and hit the button and subscribe to the Bridge Briefing. Start with the headline that started it all. Microsoft is pulling back. Here's what actually happened. In the most recent quarter Microsoft reported, the company spent over $34 billion in capital expenditures in a single 3-month window. That's up from the prior quarter, not down. Satya Nadella told analysts Microsoft plans to increase its AI capacity by more than 80% this fiscal year and roughly double its data center footprint over the next 2 years. They ended last quarter with more than 400 data centers. The pullback story was about a timing of a few lease deliveries that got amplified into an entire collapse narrative on LinkedIn. Microsoft's own cloud operations president had to step in and knock it down. Money talks. $80 billion a year says a lot. Now Uber. Yes. Uber burned through its full year of AI coding budget in about 4 months. The bears say, see, it didn't work. But read it again. They didn't run out of budget because the tool failed. They ran out of budget because their engineers used too much of it in coding and they couldn't keep up. That's not a fire. That's a flood. Demand outran the forecast. The honest response, which is what Uber's actually doing, isn't rip it out, it's reprice it. Those are opposite verbs. And the big one, that MIT study, that 95% of corporate AI pilots fail to show a return, true. It's a real study, but MIT was crystal clear about why, and almost nobody quotes that part. The failures aren't technological, they are organizational. What the researchers call a learning gap, companies bolt a chatbot onto a broken process and then they act surprised. The data showed buying specialized vendors succeeds about 2/3 of the time. Building it yourself succeeds a third as often. The biggest returns were sitting in back office automation, and that's exactly where companies weren't spending. So the headline is 95% fail. The actual finding is we just don't know how to use it yet. At 2 a.m., that's not a verdict. That's a to-do list. Look, I'll make a deal with you. If you like this information, then sign up for my newsletter. It's in the description below. And if you do, and you use this code right here, I'll send you a free copy of my book, The Bridge. Thanks very much. Here's the number that ends the argument. If AI were really collapsing, then usage would be falling. Okay, so let's look at usage. A token is the atomic unit of AI. Roughly 3/4 of a word. It's how you measure whether anyone is actually using this stuff. 1 year ago, Google was processing 480 trillion tokens per month. This year, that number is 3.2 quadrillion per month. That is not 20% growth. That's not double. That's roughly 7 times in 12 months. Hundreds of millions of tokens every second across Search, Gmail, Workspace. There now are hundreds of enterprises individually consuming more than 1 trillion tokens a year apiece. Over that same window, the price of these tokens fell from around $10 per million down to roughly $2.50. Some workloads are down 90%. So prices collapsed and spending went up 22%. How? It's called Jevans paradox. In 1865, an economist noticed that when steam engines got more efficient, Britain didn't burn less coal, it burned more. Because cheap power made 1,000 new uses suddenly worth it. When Microsoft's CEO was asked about cheaper AI models, he posted 4 words: Jevans paradox strikes again. That's what you're watching. Every time AI gets cheaper, it gets used for something that wasn't worth it yesterday. Cheaper doesn't shrink the market. Cheaper detonates it. That's the opposite of a collapse. That's an industry crossing from expensive demo to everyday infrastructure. The late 90s, telecom companies poured around $500 billion into laying fiber cable, convinced that internet traffic would explode. Then the dotcom crash hit. Demand hadn't caught up yet. By some estimates, 85 to 95% of that fiber sat completely dark, unused, for years. Companies went bankrupt. Investors got wiped out. And then that wasted fiber became the backbone of everything. YouTube, Netflix, the cloud, Web 2.0. The whole modern internet runs on rails that looked in 2002 like the dumbest money ever spent. The infrastructure outlived the hype. It always does. Now, I want to be fair, because the parallel isn't perfect, and the difference actually helps my case. In 2000, the poster child companies were unprofitable. Only about 1 in 7 turned a profit, and Cisco traded at 100 times earnings. Today, the company at the center of this, NVIDIA, trades around 47 times earnings on real revenue growth of 65% a year. In 2000, they built the backbone, but not the last mile. Most people were still on dial-up, so the demand, it wasn't there yet. Today, the internet is everywhere. The last mile is already built. The demand is already here. 3 quadrillion tokens per month. That's how here. So if anything, we're better positioned in 2026 than we were in the internet in 2000. The correction is real. The collapse is fiction. So if this is a transition to what? And here's where I'm going to plant my flag. The first era of AI, 23 and 2024, was about training. A handful of giant centralized brains built by a handful of giant companies. That era is ending. The era we're walking into is the inference era. Not building the models, but running them billions of times a day, everywhere. And running them is a fundamentally different shaped problem. Training wants to be centralized. Inference wants to be everywhere the data is. In the factory, in the hospital, the city, the vehicle, the border of a sovereign nation that does not want its citizens' data leaving the country. That last part is the quiet revolution. McKinsey estimates 30 to 40% of all AI spending is about to be shaped by sovereignty requirements. Who owns the compute? Where the data physically sits? Whose laws govern it? Forrester is calling 2026 the year of tech nationalism. There were 23 new sovereign AI infrastructure projects announced in a single quarter. This is a market measured in hundreds of billions of dollars, growing close to 28% a year. The future of AI is not one cathedral of compute in the desert. It's a distributed, sovereign, decentralized fabric. Intelligence that runs close to the people it serves, under the control of the people it serves, at the edge. This is the entire reason I'm building what I'm building. The bears point at the power problem. AI uses too much energy. That's not a wall. That's the thesis behind my Grid 7, behind the meter energy. So compute and power get solved together. The bears point at the overbuild, too much centralized capacity in all the wrong places. That's my gray wolf data centers, franchised, sovereign, AI optimized edge data centers built where the inference actually needs to happen. And remember that dotcom lesson? The fiber only became a public good when it got opened up, shared, made interoperable. A private overbuild just becomes a private graveyard. So the answer to this, will this infrastructure serve everyone? That's Atlas Cloud DAO. Decentralized, openly governed compute, not a moat, a commons. That's the bridge. Centralized hype on one side, a distributed, sovereign, human-aligned AI world on the other. Somebody has to build the span between them. That's the work. So let's go back to that clock. It's 2 a.m. The people who were promised a finished revolution by sunrise, well, they went to bed angry. They're the ones making the "it's all collapsing" videos right now. But 2 a.m. isn't where the story ends. It's the quietest, darkest, least glamorous hour. And it's when the people who are actually building things are waking up. They pour the foundations, they lay the rails, and while everyone else mistakes silence for a funeral, 3 quadrillion tokens a month is not a funeral. This was never going to be a straight line. No technology for that matter ever is. There's the presence to see clearly what's actually happening instead of what the headlines scream. The purpose to build the right thing. Sovereign, distributed, edge, and human aligned. And the prosperity that follows for the people who didn't flinch at 2 o'clock in the morning. Friends, the bubble isn't popping. The hype is just catching up to the reality. And the reality has 22 hours left to go. I'm Pete Sacco, and this is The Bridge Briefing. If this reframed the story for you, then please subscribe, because we're just going to watch the next 22 hours together. And if you want to dive deeper into why the AI bubble isn't popping, then check out my other videos where I explain how the AI infrastructure build is not collapsing. It's just changing shape. You won't want to miss it. I'm Pete Sacco. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Bridge Briefing.